Orphan nurse adopted dying patient, unaware. He had a secret trust fund in her name. The words flashed across Emma Walker's mind as she stared at the letter in her trembling hands, her entire world tilting on its axis. But that was the end of the story. The beginning had started 6 months earlier, on a rain-soaked Tuesday that smelled of antiseptic and despair. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Memorial Hospital buzzed overhead, casting everyone in the same sickly pale glow. Emma adjusted her badge, smoothed her scrubs, and took a deep breath before entering room 423. New patient, terminal diagnosis, another soul she would care for until they left this world. This was her calling, her purpose, to provide comfort to those who, like her, often had no one else. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice practiced and warm as she checked the chart. "I'm Emma, and I'll be your primary nurse during your stay with us." The man in the bed didn't respond. He lay still, gaunt face turned toward the window where rain streaked down like tears on glass. His skin had the translucent quality that came with prolonged illness, blue veins visible beneath the surface like rivers on a map. The oncology ward was familiar with this particular cartography of suffering. "The doctor will be by shortly to discuss your treatment plan," Emma continued, undeterred by his silence. In her 8 years of nursing, she'd learned that everyone processed their diagnoses differently. "Is there anything I can get you in the meantime? Water? An extra blanket? You can get me someone else," he finally said, his voice like gravel. He turned to look at her then, his gray eyes sharp despite the illness ravaging his body. "I don't need a child playing nurse." Emma's smile didn't falter, though something cold settled in her chest. At 32, she was hardly a child, but she'd grown accustomed to being underestimated. Her petite frame and youthful features often worked against her in establishing authority, especially with older patients. "I assure you, Mr. Harrison, I'm fully qualified. I've been working in oncology for 6 years now." She moved to check his IV line. "And I'm afraid you're stuck with me. We're short-staffed as it is." He made a non-committal sound, returning his gaze to the window. "You have no family listed on your intake forms," Emma noted, scanning his chart. "Is there someone we should contact? Anyone who should know you're here?" "No," he said simply. The word hung between them, heavy with a loneliness Emma recognized all too well. "I understand," she said softly, and something in her tone made him look at her again. Really look at her this time? "I'll be back to check on you in an hour, Mr. Harrison." As she left the room, she felt his eyes following her, assessing. She was used to that too, the way people tried to figure out what was wrong with her, why she cared so much, why she worked holidays and took extra shifts, why she volunteered to sit with the dying when no one else would. They never guessed it was because she knew what it was like to die alone. She'd watched it happen to her mother when Emma was just 7 years old. No father in the picture, no relatives stepping forward, just a little girl holding a cooling hand as monitors flatlined and the world changed forever. 25 years in the foster system had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was this: everyone deserves someone at the end, even grumpy old men who didn't want her help. "You're back, Mr. Harrison," Robert, according to his chart, observed 3 days later as Emma entered his room with her morning rounds. "Every day," she replied with a small smile. "That's how jobs work." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Progress. Your white cell count is still concerning," she said, checking his chart. "Dr. Patel wants to adjust your medication." Robert sighed, a sound filled with resignation. "Why bother? We both know where this is heading." Emma paused in her note-taking, meeting his gaze directly. "Because every day matters, Mr. Harrison. Every single one. Easy for you to say. You have plenty left." She didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on changing his IV bag. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind wandered to the empty apartment she'd returned to after her shift. The framed photo of her mother, the only one she had, sitting on a nightstand beside a bed where she slept alone. The silence that greeted her each night. "We never know how many days we have," she finally said. "That's why each one counts." Something shifted in Robert's expression. "How old are you?" "Really?" 32. He studied her for a long moment. "You have old eyes for someone so young?" The observation startled her. Most people noticed her compassion, her efficiency, her occasionally dark humor, occupational hazards of oncology nursing. Few looked closely enough to see the shadows. "I've been told that before," she admitted. "Orphan?" he asked bluntly. Emma nearly dropped the medication she was measuring. "How did recognizes he said simply. I was 10 when my parents died. Car accident. Shuffled through the system until I aged out. The revelation formed an unexpected bridge between them. Emma found herself sharing, 7 for me. Mom got sick. Cancer, actually. Leukemia. Is that why you do this? He gestured around the hospital room. She shrugged, uncomfortable with how accurately he'd read her. Partly, it's complicated. Always is. He closed his eyes, seeming suddenly exhausted by the brief connection. The new medication makes me tired. Rest then, Emma said, adjusting his blanket. I'll be here when you wake up. I know you will, he murmured, already drifting off. The good ones always come back. Weeks passed, and Emma found herself spending extra time in room 423. Robert Harrison was still gruff, still difficult, but something had softened between them. He asked about her shifts, remembered details about her co-workers, and occasionally shared stories from his own life, though he remained mysteriously vague about what he'd done for a living. Something boring with numbers was all he would say when pressed. Nothing worth talking about. One evening, Emma arrived to find him hunched over in pain, his breathing labored. Why didn't you call for someone? She demanded, immediately adjusting his medication and oxygen. Didn't want to bother anyone, he gasped. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, she snapped, fear making her voice sharper than intended. That's literally why we're here. Once the pain medication took effect and his breathing eased, she sat in the chair beside his bed, her professional detachment slipping. You have to tell us when it gets bad, Robert. He looked surprised at her use of his first name. In 6 weeks, she'd never called him anything but Mr. Harrison. Sorry, she said, realizing her mistake. Mr. Harrison. No, he said quietly. Robert is fine. Actually, my friends used to call me Bobby. Did they? She smiled, trying to imagine this serious, dignified man answering to such a casual nickname. Not many of them left now, he admitted. Time does that. Takes people away bit by bit until... He gestured at the empty room. Emma felt a familiar ache in her chest. I understand. I know you do, he said, studying her face. That's why I don't mind you being here. The simple admission touched her more than it should have. In her profession, maintaining boundaries was crucial, but something about Robert Harrison had slipped past her defenses. Perhaps it was their shared history of loss, or the way he saw through her practiced cheerfulness to the loneliness beneath. The doctor says the treatments aren't working as well as they'd hoped, she told him gently. Have you thought about what you want to do next? Robert was quiet for a long moment. I don't want to die in this room with these fluorescent lights and that terrible painting. He nodded toward the generic landscape on the wall. Hospice care might be an option, Emma suggested. They could help arrange... No, he interrupted. No strangers. I've had enough of those in my life. Emma hesitated before asking, what about home care? If we could arrange for a nurse to visit, you could spend your remaining time in familiar surroundings. Robert's laugh was bitter. My apartment is just another place to be alone. At least here I have you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating in their honesty. Emma felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the professional wall she'd built over years of caring for the dying. What if, she began, then stopped, unsure if she was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. What if you weren't alone? The decision to bring Robert home with her violated every professional boundary Emma had maintained throughout her career. She arranged a leave of absence from the hospital, consulted with ethics committees, signed countless forms, and finally, on a clear autumn morning, helped Robert Harrison into her small car. You don't have to do this, he said for the 12th time as she adjusted his seatbelt. It's too much to ask. You didn't ask, Emma reminded him, closing the door and walking around to the driver's side. I offered. Her apartment wasn't large, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older building with no elevator. She'd spent the weekend rearranging furniture, moving her things into the living room so Robert could have the bedroom with its attached bathroom. It's not much, she apologized as she helped him through the door, but it gets good light in the mornings. Robert stood in the center of her living room, taking in the sparse furnishings, the few personal touches, some plants on the windowsill, books stacked on an end table, that single photograph of her mother. It's perfect, he said quietly. The first days of their new arrangement were awkward, both of them navigating unfamiliar territory. Emma administered his medications, helped him bathe, prepared meals that he rarely finished. At night, she slept on the pull-out couch, listening for any sound of distress from the bedroom. Gradually, a routine emerged. Mornings spent in comfortable silence, Emma reading beside the window while Robert dozed. Afternoons watching old movies he recommended, his commentary providing glimpses into his earlier life. Evenings where he insisted on helping with dinner preparation, though he could barely stand for more than a few minutes at a time. "I wasn't always this useless," he said one night, frustrated after dropping a bowl of salad. Emma knelt to clean up the mess. "You're not useless, Robert. I used to be good with my hands," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Built things, worked with wood, had a whole workshop once. What happened to it?" she asked, genuinely curious about this new piece of his past. "Sold it all after Diane died." His voice softened on his wife's name. "Couldn't stand to look at it anymore." "Your wife?" Emma prompted gently. 27 years. He nodded. "Cancer too, like your mother." "Ovarian. 15 years ago now." "I'm sorry," Emma said, the inadequate words all she had to offer. "We never had children," he continued, his gaze distant. "Something I regretted after she was gone. No one to leave things to? No one to remember us." Emma touched his hand lightly. "I'll remember you, Robert." His eyes, when they met hers, were bright with unshed tears. "That's worth something, isn't it? Being remembered." "It's worth everything," she whispered. As autumn deepened into winter, Robert's condition deteriorated. The pain increased despite the medications, and his lucid periods grew shorter. Emma took to sleeping on the floor beside his bed, afraid to miss his final moments. "Go back to your couch," he'd insist on his better days. "I'm not dead yet. I'm comfortable here." She'd lie, and they both knew why she stayed. One snowy evening, as light faded early from the sky, Robert seemed suddenly more alert than he had been in days. "Emma," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "There's something I need to tell you." She set aside the book she'd been reading to him. "I'm listening." "In my wallet," he said, gesturing weakly toward the dresser where she kept his few possessions. "There's a card. A lawyer's card." Confused, Emma retrieved the wallet and found a business card for Goldstein and Associates estate attorneys. "After I'm gone," Robert continued, "you need to call them. Promise me." "Robert, I don't understand." "Promise me," he insisted, more forcefully than seemed possible given his weakened state. "I promise," she said, tucking the card into her pocket. "But why—" "Not now," he interrupted, suddenly looking exhausted again. "Just know that you won't have to worry anymore. About money, about the future. I've made sure of it." "I don't want your money," Emma said, alarmed by the direction of the conversation. "That's not why I brought you here." "I know." He smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Before she could question him further, his eyes drifted closed. His breathing slowed, and Emma knew instinctively that the end was near. She climbed onto the bed beside him, careful not to disturb the IV lines, and took his hand in hers. "I'm here, Robert," she whispered. "You're not alone." Hours passed. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Emma talked softly, sharing memories of her mother, stories from the hospital, dreams she'd never told anyone. Whether Robert could hear her, she didn't know, but it felt important to fill the space between them with words. Near dawn, his breathing changed. Emma recognized the pattern, the long pauses, the shallow catches. She'd seen it many times before, but never with someone she loved. And she did love Robert Harrison, this gruff, kind man who had somehow become family in the span of a few short months. "It's okay," she told him, tears streaming down her face. "You can let go now. Diane is waiting for you." His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around hers, and then relaxed for the final time. Emma sat with him as the room gradually lightened with the winter dawn, snow still falling outside the window, creating a world of perfect stillness. 2 weeks after Robert's funeral, a small, quiet affair attended by a handful of former colleagues and neighbors, Emma returned to work. The familiar routines of the hospital provided some comfort, though room 423 remained a place she avoided when possible. The call from Goldstein and Associates came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after Robert's death. The lawyer's voice was professionally sympathetic as he explained that he needed to see Emma regarding the Harrison estate. "There must be some mistake," Emma insisted. "Mr. Harrison didn't have an estate. He lived in a small apartment. He didn't own anything of value." "Nevertheless," the lawyer persisted, "Mr. Harrison named you as his sole beneficiary. There are matters we need to discuss in person." Bewildered, Emma agreed to an appointment the following day. She spent a restless night wondering what Robert could possibly have left her. His few possessions had been donated or discarded. Perhaps he'd had a small savings account he wanted her to have, enough for a vacation maybe, or some new furniture for her apartment. The offices of Goldstein and Associates occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building. Emma felt out of place in her simple dress and worn coat as the receptionist led her to a conference room where an elderly man in an expensive suit waited. "Ms. Walker," he greeted her, extending his hand. "I'm Harold Goldstein. I've been handling Robert Harrison's affairs for over 30 years. 30 years? Emma repeated, surprised. I didn't realize. Few people did? Goldstein nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Robert valued his privacy. He was also, I should mention, considerably wealthier than he led most people to believe. Emma felt the room tilt slightly. Wealthier? Robert Harrison was the majority shareholder in Harrison Financial Group, Goldstein explained, sliding a folder across the table. The company was founded by his grandfather, expanded by his father, and transformed by Robert himself before he sold his controlling interest 15 years ago. Emma stared at the figures in the folder, unable to process the numbers she was seeing. This can't be right. I assure you it is, Goldstein said gently. Robert was worth approximately $47 million at the time of his death. The air seemed to vanish from the room. 47 million? Emma repeated numbly. Yes, and he has left it all to you. Emma shook her head, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what she was being told. There must be some mistake. I only knew him for a few months. I was his nurse. You were much more than that, Ms. Walker, Goldstein interrupted. In the 40 years I knew Robert Harrison, I never saw him connect with anyone the way he described his connection with you. Not since Diane. Emma's eyes filled with tears. He told you about me? He did more than that. Goldstein slid another document across the table. 6 weeks after meeting you, he established this trust in your name. He was quite explicit about the timing, said he knew from the moment you told him everyday matters that you were the one. Emma stared at the trust document, dated exactly when Goldstein had indicated. 6 weeks after Robert had been admitted to St. Mary's, long before she'd brought him home. He said you reminded him of himself at your age, Goldstein continued. Alone, dedicated to your work, caring for others while neglecting yourself. He wanted to give you options, freedom, a chance at the life he felt you deserved. I don't understand, Emma whispered. Why me? Goldstein reached into his briefcase and withdrew an envelope. He asked me to give you this. Perhaps it will explain better than I can. With trembling fingers, Emma opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Robert's handwriting, shaky but legible, filled the page. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, then I've finally stopped being a burden to you. I'm sorry for that, for taking so much and giving so little in return during our time together. But I hope what I leave behind will make up for it, at least in some small way. You asked me once what I did for a living. Something boring with numbers, I said. The truth is more complicated. I made a fortune, Emma. More money than any one person needs. And when Diane died, I lost all purpose for it. There was no one to leave it to, no one who would use it the way I wanted it used, with compassion, with kindness, with an understanding of what really matters in this world. Then I met you, a nurse with old eyes who told a dying man that every day matters, who sat with me when no one else would, who brought me into her home and made my final days worth living. I've watched you, Emma. You work too hard. You live too simply. You give everything to others and keep nothing for yourself. You deserve more, not because you took care of me, but because of who you are. The trust I've established in your name will provide for all your needs and then some. Quit that job if you want. Travel, study. Open that small clinic for underserved communities you mentioned once when you thought I was sleeping. Or keep nursing one patient at a time, knowing you never have to worry about rent or bills or retirement again. My lawyer will explain the details. The money is yours, no strings attached. My only hope is that it brings you a fraction of the peace you brought me. You told me once that you would remember me. That's all I wanted in the end, to be remembered by someone worth remembering. Thank you for making my last days my best ones. With love and gratitude, Robert Bobby Harrison, P.S. The system failed us both, Emma. Maybe with these resources you can help make sure it fails fewer children in the future. Just a thought from an old man who wishes he'd done more good while he had the chance. Emma lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. Orphan nurse adopted dying patient, unaware he had a secret trust fund in her name. She whispered, the reality of the past months hitting her with full force. I'm sorry? Goldstein asked, not catching her words. Nothing, Emma said, carefully folding the letter and returning it to the envelope. Just summing up the situation. There's one more thing, Goldstein added. Robert owned a property upstate, a house on a few acres with what he described as a decent workshop. He was quite insistent that you might want to see it before deciding whether to keep or sell it. Emma thought of Robert's words. I used to be good with my hands, built things, worked with wood, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I'd like to see it, she said softly. The house was nothing like Emma had imagined. Not the mansion a multimillionaire might own, but a comfortable, modest home nestled among tall pines, with a separate building that must have been the workshop Robert mentioned. The real estate agent unlocked the door and stepped back. Take your time. I'll wait in the car. Emma entered slowly, feeling like an intruder in a space that was somehow already familiar. The furnishings were simple but quality, the walls adorned with photographs, many featuring a smiling woman who must have been Diane. She moved through the rooms, running her fingers over handcrafted furniture that she now realized Robert must have made himself. In the kitchen, a small table sat beneath a window overlooking the woods, two chairs positioned as if waiting for conversation over morning coffee. The master bedroom held more photos, Robert and Diane in their younger years, traveling, laughing, building a life together. On the bedside table, Emma was startled to find a framed picture of herself, taken without her knowledge, sitting by Robert's hospital bed with her head thrown back in laughter. She didn't remember the moment, but the happiness on both their faces was unmistakable. A connection formed against all odds, two orphans who had found each other at exactly the right moment. The workshop, when she finally ventured inside, brought fresh tears to her eyes. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboards. Half-finished projects sat covered with cloths. A wooden rocking chair, clearly meant as a gift for someone, stood in one corner with a small card attached. For Emma, every day matters. He must have been working on it before his diagnosis, before he even knew her, as if the universe had been preparing this gift long before they met. Emma sat in the chair, letting it hold her as she rocked gently back and forth. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent in the gathering dusk. She thought of Robert, his gruffness hiding such generosity, his loneliness mirroring her own, the unlikely bond that had formed between them in his final months. He had given her more than money. He had given her a home, a purpose, a family, however brief. And in return, she had given him the only thing he truly wanted: to be remembered, to matter to someone at the end. Emma pulled Robert's letter from her pocket and read it again in the fading light. When she reached the postscript, "The system failed us both, Emma. Maybe with these resources you can help make sure it fails fewer children in the future." An idea began to take shape. The house was large enough, the property spacious. With Robert's fortune, she could create something meaningful here, a place for children aging out of foster care perhaps. A transitional home where they could learn skills, prepare for independence, be surrounded by nature and care instead of institutions and paperwork. Or perhaps a retreat for nurses and caregivers, a place to rest and recover from the emotional toll of their work. Maybe both. There was room here for many dreams. She closed her eyes, feeling Robert's presence in the workshop, in the gentle motion of the rocking chair he had crafted for her. "I remember you," she whispered, "and I always will." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a blanket of possibility. Inside, in a workshop built by a man who had found his purpose in his final days, Emma Walker began to imagine a future neither of them could have foreseen, one built on an unexpected connection, an act of extraordinary kindness, and the simple, profound truth that every day matters, especially the ones we share.